Masterminds have been around for a long time, right? But unless you had a bunch of extra income to throw at it, you couldn't be a part of it. Well, we wanted to solve that problem. And so we're bringing masterminds to you for free. Welcome to Mastermind for the Masses.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Mastermind for the Masses. Today's actually a little special. We're actually going to be doing an interview with our very own Josh Nelson, who was nominated to be one of the top 25 professionals in customer experience by the Customer Experience magazine. And so, yeah, we just kind of wanted to delve deeper into his experience in that realm and just kind of interview him. So we'll just jump right into it, Josh. So first thing very curious about is what do you think falls under the realm of customer experience, and maybe what do you think would be like the top three things that should be focused on when considering customer experience management?
Yeah. So, I mean, customer experience, it definitely fits into kind of like a finite definition, but also I think it can expand based on who your customer is because customer experience can expand to like an organization's customer, or, if you are a support entity within a business, your customer might be internal employees. So, that's in that internal employee situation. Sometimes the lines between CX and EX can get a little bit blurred, but the principles still apply similarly. So when you're thinking about the most important elements of CX, you asked about the top three. Uh, I'm thinking one of the things that would be very important to me is just what is the emotional connection or the feeling that you leave those who you interact with. So is it positive, and does it emote kind of a good memory, right? Because
Mm,
even a customer experience that emotes no memory is not a great customer experience. It might not have been a bad one, but it's not necessarily one of those memorable ones. And the only time people really talk about your business or your interactions tends to be when they had a really negative experience or they had a really positive experience. So
mm,
you want to shoot to create an emotional response, but hopefully that emotional response is a positive one. And one of the ways I think you can really help to impact that is focusing on something called the customer effort score. Traditionally, this might be more of an IT term or in the tech realm, but I think it
mhm,
applies across the board. How easy is it for someone to work with you and complete the task
mm,
that they want to complete? Because honestly, that's what's going to make a positive experience. I have a general rule of thumb, even when I'm trying to do business with someone, if they make it too hard for me to give them my money, it's probably not somebody that I'm going to work with. So
yeah.
make it a simple process. Make sure that I enjoy the process as I go through it. And then I think the other part of CX that is super important is, the feedback loop. So once you've delivered that experience, even if it was great, is there something that could have been improved? Because there's two things that adds to. It's the collective improvement and the continuous improvement of the experience you're able to provide, and as obviously the sum of the parts are going to improve that whole. But ultimately it also lets whoever your customer is know that you really do value and care about their feedback, and especially when you take action on it. So you're providing a great experience, but you also want to know what you could do better. And I think that allowing your customer to be heard and letting them know that they're heard really goes a long way too.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, it would be ease of interacting with you, that sort of general feedback loop, and taking feedback and implementing things based on it, and then in general though, just making sure that you focus on creating a very powerful, positive experience is like your basically your top three is what you're kind of getting at.
Yeah, if I had to narrow it down to three, I think those would be my primary ones that I focused on. I mean, obviously you can go down the rabbit hole with various ways to measure and monitor, with personas and journeys, and get into all sorts of CX tenants. But if I had to
Mm,
pick three tent poles to put it on, I think those are the three that I would lead with.
yeah, no, it makes sense. I think those are pretty strong ones. And actually, to that point, when you're talking about customer journeys, I don't know how familiar maybe all of our viewers are with that terminology. I am familiar with it just based off my interactions with you and some of the conversations we've had. But could you go into that? Because I think customer journeys really tie into the fact that not each customer or person that you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis is the same. They all have different personalities, different wants, different needs. And so how do you account for that when you're trying to provide them a very positive experience, right? Because everyone kind of wants to feel like it's tailored to them. So how
Hmm.
can you deliver on those expectations?
Yeah. So I think I do want to touch on the customer journeys and I'll circle back to that. But I think before we jump into that, I think it's important to also understand your customer personas or profiles. Who is
Mm,
it that you're serving? Because once you have kind of, the few buckets of folks, because typically, although yes, everyone's an individual and the only way to scale experience is to personalize it, the there is an element of like qualities, right? So maybe it's men that are between 30 and 50, or maybe it's teenage girls, maybe it's babies, right? It depends on whatever your target market is and what you're producing. But once you've figured out what that those personas are, because you may serve multiples, then you can really create those journeys, because the way that one demographic interacts with your product versus the way another demographic interacts with it, the journey may be different. For example, if you had some younger folks versus senior citizens, right, there's a good chance that the younger folks are probably going to go to their phones and try to look for a mobile app or something like that first. Whereas, a senior citizen may choose to interact with you more in person, or whatever other options might exist, right? So you want to understand what those personas are, and then the journey really is basically the map of the initial interaction, and possibly even before the initial interaction, right? It might be the awareness component of getting people to know your brand, all the way through to the final, um, you know, endpoint, which hopefully is not just a sale. It's actually that feedback loop, which continues to keep that journey going. But basically, the concept behind the customer journey is you're able to look at each of the individual steps and the different touch points that you have with that customer, and look for really three things. What are they thinking, what are they feeling, and what are they doing? And during those processes, you're able to, by mapping that out, you're more easily able to identify potential bottlenecks and opportunities for improvement. And putting yourself even into one of those journeys as you walk through it, you can go, wow, I really wouldn't like this portion. I placed my order and it takes 6 weeks to get here. Is there something we can do to make that 4 weeks or 2 weeks? Right? What can we look at in our processes and procedures that impact that journey in a positive way?
mm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. How would you go about, what are some effective ways, I guess, of mapping those things out, right? I mean, obviously, I think, the more time you spend with a company or your business, you have a better understanding of the people involved just through
Mhm.
raw time. But is there anything you can do? Maybe you're just stepping into a role or an organization. Is there anything you can do to help facilitate learning those elements? Is there anything you would be kind of directing yourself towards?
Yeah. I mean, put yourself into the process, right? If you want to see what the process of ordering something on a website is, go through the steps and get all the way through the website. If you want to evaluate the process of, getting an ID badge in a new company, get a new ID badge, right? And map that as you go. If you need to put in a property request, put in a property request, and kind of understand what it is to be that. As you're with the company longer, you may start to get a general feel of some of those and be able to high level journey it. But even, I think, even if you've been there a long time, just going through the process yourself, or getting feedback from people that actually go through the process, is vital, right? Because you can think one thing, but experience is something else.
Gotcha. What about for the persona part, right? Because maybe I think that might even be the harder one to do if you haven't
Yeah.
gotten to interact with all the individuals as much. So what would be your, I guess, way of tackling that issue, like directly just coming in?
Yeah, so it depends on what phase I think you are in growth, right? If you're an earlier company and you don't have a huge customer base, your personas might be more what your hopeful target market is. Obviously you're targeting a certain audience of some kind, most likely, and you want to develop a persona around that. If you're a more established company, you probably have kind of some historical records and some sales data, or people that have taken part in your business offerings, and hopefully you've been able to capture some demographics around those individuals to really help you define those personas. You don't want to go too granular with your personas. You do want to leave them a little bit broader, because putting people into a bucket is difficult to begin with. And if you get too granular, you're going to wind up with too many personas to even manage, or really what you run the risk of is having so much overhead to maintain that you might not keep up with your journeys and your personas, and really you know get any value add from having those things.
Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense. So you mentioned CES, which I believe you said was customer effort score, correct?
Correct. Yes, sir.
So how do you go about actually creating, like, what goes into generating that score? And are there any other metrics that you currently use that are helpful for measuring your overall customer experience within your organization that you think can be more broadly applied to other organizations or businesses?
Yeah, I mean, probably one of the most commonly known ones out there is NPS, right? Your net promoter score. Essentially, would you recommend this business to a friend? I mean,
Mm,
that's what that question is. You've got your customer satisfaction scores. Everyone's experienced this, where hey, we strive for tens. Please give us a 5-star review. Um, the downside of that is, unfortunately, the behavior that it's driving is not necessarily really there to improve the experience. It's there to achieve some sort of metric or target, right? When you have someone always asking you for tens, especially if it's tied to, when I go out to eat, for example, I always give my waitresses or waiters, full tens. Great experience, all of that, because I know my wife used to serve, and I know for a fact that influences their schedule, right? And so I don't want to make their life harder, take money out of their pocket by them not getting hours. So of course I'm going to rank them as good as I can. So those are a little tricky when you start thinking about NPS and CSAT, just because of how they're used. The CES, I think, is a little more reliable, just because it's easier to gauge, in from two ways. One is, the real way to track it is basically getting feedback from the people that went through it. Hey, how difficult was this on a scale of 1 to 5? And nobody's saying, hey, we strive for fives to make your life easy, right? So it's a really, it just doesn't come out as fluid. Um, so that's number one. But number two is, you can look at some pretty simple metrics around things too. So like, if it's time to check out, right? If you can reduce that time, obviously you've done something to probably make things easier for the customer. At very least, you've reduced the amount of time they have to wait in line, whether that's in a physical line or a virtual line on the web, right? Um, you've obviously made an impact on the ease of either the site or the way you operate the line by adding more cashiers or something like that. So there's a couple of there's the softer, qualitative metrics from asking the people impacted, but then there are those quantitative metrics that you can pull from the data around, speed, do sales increase, do cart size get larger, different things along those lanes that really can also tell you whether you're making an impact on how easy it is for someone to work with you.
gotcha, that makes sense. Have you ever come across a time where you have this idea or this ideal in your head of what it would look like number wise to achieve a certain thing in your brain, like this is what the best would look like and it would be these scores, and then do you try to align yourself with those scores, or do you have to I guess, play it by ear? Like, how much do you let the scores influence and uh, I guess carry weight over your decision making when it comes to your initiatives around customer experience?
So I kind of have a different philosophy on, I guess, experience management. Which customer experience obviously falls under as well. Experience management is more of the holistic term for
Mm,
all experience activities. So whether that's customer experience, employee experience, technology experience, et cetera, right? Um, and experience management, I think, does rely heavily on those metrics because what you're doing is you're managing the events that are occurring. Very similar to management in the workplace, you have to make sure that certain things happen. What I've done with experience leadership, which is my company, is I've really tried to pave the way for what it could be. And that's less focused on metrics. That's more about vision and where something could go in the ideal state. And I think that is less about metrics, even though you may target certain lead metrics to try to improve your what you're doing or to measure the results of your efforts. But I think that's really about just focusing on, is this experience getting better? Not necessarily to hit a number or a metric, even though you, like I said, you may use management techniques in the experience management side of things to do that. But when you're really talking about how do I get my experience to the ideal state, I think that's when you cross over into this concept that I've dubbed experience leadership.
gotcha. Okay. I'm curious because I know you just mentioned obviously like your organization sort of having metrics that they're tracking around this sort of thing. How do you get, I guess, the buy-in for, I guess, making a lot of efforts into this field, right? Because I think with some
Mhm.
organizations, depending on the field especially, they may not consider it a high priority depending on what your specific group is doing. How do you get buy-in from them? And also how do you generate buy-in from the team below you who will actually be responsible for sort of implementing the efforts that you want to pursue?
Well, I think with everything that you're trying to gain buy-in for, right? And it kind of comes naturally if you operate this way. And it's really trying to think about what value you can provide to others rather than what you're going to get out of an event, right? So I never go in trying to promote experience management or leadership around the concept of, hey, if you give me X, it'll be better. It's more, we could make this a better experience, and this is how. And then we talk about the nuts and bolts of that. But usually, especially in a business environment, you're going to use things like ROI to justify your use case. If we can improve the customer experience and we can, let's say, make it easier for them to shop on our website and our sales go up 5%, obviously now there's kind of a dollar sign investment on that or a dollar return on that investment that they made. And then after you are successful with that enough times in a row, it becomes easier and easier. You're still held to that standard, but the sales pitch becomes a little bit easier because you've shown that you can, what you do will produce results.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, but to that point, so obviously, like say the people you're managing below you, right?
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have that same dollar incentive that
Hmm.
the upper management will of an organization.
Yeah.
How do you generate excitement around that to the point where they will actually be interested, such motivated in, accomplishing the goals that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point and great question there, Colby. One of the things that, again, I circle back to this really the same answer is what value am I providing to those employees? So, we may be able to, if we make their experience better by reducing issues with something, they're going to get less calls, they're going to get less, pushback, possibly less returns, less frustration in their workday for one. The other thing I think it really does boil down to, casting that vision of what you're doing, right? It's got to be more than the day to day. And that's where I think you start to cross into the employee experience side of things is, you know, what is the vision and what is the common core value that you guys are pursuing together to provide those experiences, and what is the why that you're doing that for. I've been pretty successful in the past with imagery. It's a big thing for me. So I've likened my teams to back in the Marine Corps days, Masters of the Iron Horse, the Wolf Pack, Atlas holding up the entire company, lots of different things like that. And that excitement creates that emotional connectedness, which, really drives people to want to do the best that they can, not only because it benefits the customer, but they know that ultimately it's going to benefit them, because what we're trying to do is create a better experience for everybody across the board. And I think ultimately that's why, when you first asked me about CX and what I think of it as, it really does depend who your customers are, because in a leadership role, I feel like your direct customers are your employees. That is who you're serving. That is who you're working for. The downstream impact may be the customer that's making the purchase from your company. But at the end of the day, you're in a leadership role really serving your the people you oversee as your customer.
Yep, absolutely. Um, I'm curious on this next one, what you think are the most important, I guess, like tools or platforms that I guess impact customer experience and customer experience management overall, like the things that you would actually use to help you identify, the what experience the customer is having, but also like things for them that would be extremely impactful as well.
Yeah. So there are some great tools that exist in the marketplace for experience management, but a good chunk of them are not cheap. So, what I always encourage people to do is look at the tools that you have, look at the resources that you have, and, don't let the fact that you don't have some sophisticated technology tool deter you from starting. When I first started into the experience management realm, it literally was a pad of paper that I sat down and asked somebody how they felt that their experience was. I said, "What do you love? What do you hate? What do you want to make sure we keep doing? What would you improve?" And in an ideal, what's your ideal world, right? And just kind of asked a few questions like that, and really got their information and compiled that and made a little action plan. And that was, pen and paper, or,
Yep.
nowadays probably jot it down on an iPad or type it into, a Word doc or something like that. But, um, you know, you don't necessarily need super sophisticated tools to get going. Now, if you have the funds and the budget for it, there are definitely some tools out there. And, I think a quick Google search would probably help quite a few folks find exactly what they're looking for on experience management tools. But, like I said, and I always think about it too from even a small business mindset, right? They're not going to have six figures to throw at some kind of tool that's going to really allow them to capture experience management at that high level. Um, but it doesn't mean that they can't be doing activities around it. So I guess
Yep.
my long-winded answer to your question is look at the tools that you have and see how you can use those to do what you want to accomplish with your experience management.
Absolutely. Save some money while you're at it too, right?
Yeah, I mean,
uh,
I mean, don't get me wrong; those manual methods definitely take more work and effort and labor hours, but
yep.
they're not dollar signs going out the door per se. So it's a little bit easier to swallow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, So, what has been your biggest challenge in this realm? Both either trying to solve how to make the customer experience better, or from a CXM perspective of actually managing, your efforts around it. What do you think is your biggest hurdle, either currently or in the past?
I think probably the biggest hurdle, although it's starting to get a little bit easier, but I think the biggest hurdle initially was just, customer experience was a new thing that everybody wanted to kind of know about, but they weren't 100% sure how to best implement it or what to do with it. So they were a little bit cautious. And, is this one of those, soft metrics that's almost impossible to gauge, and those types of things. And I think as it's progressed and matured and been implemented, people have seen the value. You know, it's very similar to how I think of like, you know, generative AI and, you know, chat GPT, right? It came out on the scene, the world went nuts for it, but then everyone was like, okay, but how do I use this, right? Because I don't need it to just write a story about me and my brother that went camping, right? Or whatever prompt you threw into it, just to see how it worked. But you know, businesses are still kind of on that cutting edge of trying to figure out, where does this fit in best with our organization? Where does it add value? And I think that's been kind of a similar challenge with experience management. Is just, where does it provide the most value? Where is it actually impactful? And it's not just XM for XM's sake, right? We're not checking a
Hmm.
box. We're actually making an impact and improving the experience. And I think companies that do invest have that as their intention, their goal, and they just want to make sure that, you know, that it's not wasted effort. So I think really, I guess, what if you are in an area where that shift is still happening, you know, really defining and developing a strong plan on how to get from where you are to where you want to be is valuable. If you're in a company that already understands the value of that, then it really is just executing on those plans, right? And making sure that you are focused on what's going to give the most value to your organization through those activities.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. Do you think there's ever a world in which focusing on experience management is not worth it within an organization? Whether, like, can you envision any sense and or like an example of where that might exist at all? Or do you think it could bring value to some degree, even if it's a really tiny amount?
I think there's a potential for diminishing returns. You know, I mean, you could make someone have a great experience. Let's say you worked at, I don't know, let's just pick somewhere. Let's say Amazon. You work at Amazon, right? And if you're in there in one of their warehouses, could Amazon afford to put a roller coaster into their warehouse to take you around? And would that be a great experience? Probably be an amazing experience, but is it worth, you know, are you going to get better productivity? Are you going to get, you know, I mean, it'd be cool for a day. Then people are going to be over it, and it's not really going to add to the experience. And I guess that kind of gets back to my point of, you know, what's the most, you still have to run it like a business. You still have to get a return on your investment. Um, and, you know, when you get into the experience realm, this is where it gets a little bit, you know, you really have to know what your intentions are and what you're trying to drive, because this is the challenge that I was just talking about. You know, in some people's heads, experience, yeah, let's make a great experience. We'll give everyone $1 million and buy them all Ferrari, and they'll have a great experience. But that's not really what experience management is. Experience management is trying to eliminate those avoidable headaches in the day, for the customer or the employee.
Yep. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything that you would think is lacking or missing from the conversation around experience management or customer experience in general right now, like just in the general ecosystem of conversation around it?
Um, yeah. So for me, right, I think in the ethos of kind of history, right, you've got management was something that we focused on very heavily in, you know, the early business days. It was business management degrees and things along those lines. Um, but over time, we realized that although management is necessary, leadership is also an element that was required to really inspire and drive results. So I think of management more around, you know, ensuring that what needs to happen happens, monitoring what's going on, whereas leadership is really casting a vision and taking you to the next location. You need somebody to be able to, for lack of a better term, lead, to that intended destination. And so, where I think we're going to see in the coming years is kind of a natural evolution of experience management into this concept of experience leadership. So, experience management is very much driven by what is, right? We're mapping out the personas of the people who shop with us. We're mapping out the journeys of the people that they're going through at the moment.
Mm,
And although we're trying to figure out opportunities and improve those along the way, we're not starting with what is the vision, what is the ideal situation that we want to go to, and then working our way backwards, which is what we tend to do more in leadership than management. Management tries to improve current processes, leadership creates whole new ones sometimes, right? And so I think what we're going
Yep.
to see is a shift from experience management, not necessarily a shift, because just like management is required for good leadership, so too do I think experience management is going to be required for effective experience leadership. But I think that that is an area and a tenet that is going to start to come out and grow.
Hmm. Honestly, I didn't even think about that as a difference, like the difference between management and leadership. Um, that's really neat. I mean, honestly, it makes sense though because you, like you're saying, you do need a way to like improve on it over time as well. And if you're only focused on managing the existing one and making it a little bit better, over time, like, yeah, that's great, but those leaps and bound strides that you can make will come from envisioning what a better future could look like and not just focusing on the present.
Right. Instead of asking, can we, you start to ask, how can we, right? And just
Yep.
those little shifts in mindset really do drive a new level of what's possible. And that's like I said, I haven't heard the term anywhere besides me talking about it with experienced leadership, but I do think it's going to be the natural next step for sure.
Yeah, there we go. Trademark it now.
Well, I mean, that's
um
why that's why I started the business, right? Experience Leadership LLC.
there you
wanted to
go.
wanted to get it started before it became rampant.
I like it. So we've talked a lot about the positive sides of experience management. How do you generate positive experiences and some of the things that go into building that and tracking it? Do you ever feel like you need to bring things back to the negative side? Like, how do you deal with a negative experience within your customer's journey or anything like that, right? Because at least in my brain, obviously you want everyone to have a positive experience, but I would almost, at least for me, expect someone to have a negative experience at some point. Maybe not each person, right? Then it would be a pretty bad business
Yeah.
probably if everyone at least had one. But there's at least going to be one person that has a
Yeah.
bad experience, right? And you'd ideally like to win them back over or encourage them to, I guess, get in that feedback loop you were talking about. So
Mhm.
what's your approach to that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, you're absolutely right. Murphy's law, something's going to go wrong at some point in time, and someone's going to have a bad experience, no matter how good you are at that. But I think it's how you react to that experience. So absolutely right. You hit it with the feedback loop and hearing out that person. What can you do to kind of rectify that situation, right? If somebody got, let's say, an order came and it was the wrong item or was smashed up or something like that, rather than go through tons of rigmarole and all of these different questions and fill out this form, by the time you do all of that, it probably would have cost you less just a quick ship overnight, whatever the product was. It's going to make the customer happy. Don't make them return the busted one. Just say, hey, you know what? This is our gift to you. Sorry you had the problem. If that one's that bad, just throw it away. We apologize. Your new one's coming tomorrow. Now, obviously, this is where that XM comes into play a little bit and just management in general, because you're going to need to monitor how many times you do that especially for an individual. Because if one individual were to abuse that, you need to make sure that, that at that point, then you do start to get a little more formalized. But, if you, let's say you have a loyal customer, been your customer for 5 years, and they have one hiccup, why lose a 5 year loyal committed customer for some, you know when you could just make it right? And a
Yeah.
lot of that comes down to the company culture. A lot of companies have realized, and they empower their employees to just solve the problem up to a certain point. I know a lot of corporations have policies that say, if it's less than $100, just make the decision, right? You can do that without even a manager or anything like that. And
Mm,
then managers have different thresholds, right? They can make something up to $500 or whatever it might be. But
mm,
it's like, if you can just solve the problem, again, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but it all goes back to that customer effort score. If you make it difficult for somebody to work with you, or difficult for them to be a loyal uh, customer that continues to come back, they're going to find somebody that makes it easier,
yep.
right? even if it's that one bad experience, it's enough to drive somebody away.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I like what you said too about the whole you kind of have an established value that you're always willing to meet or at least not go over, like to go the extra mile just to assist the person, right? Because I think that really empowers your team to also make decisions that will improve that experience as well.
Right. And going back to a question you asked earlier about how you get the buy-in from your team, you know, they're a part of it at that point. They're solving problems. They're making the customer's experience better in real time. I
Mm,
mean, if that doesn't excite the person, then they're probably just not going to be in customer service, right? And
yeah,
I mean, most likely.
yeah, agreed. Very much agree on that. So we've covered a lot about customer experience management overall, and got a lot of good insight on that. But I'm kind of curious, taking stock of your professional journey as a whole. I'm sure you didn't start off with, experience management from the very get-go. So take us through and just kind of give us maybe a broader synopsis of what it's looked like from, start to now, and I guess what has shaped your views on this, and I guess yeah, like I guess what has led to you? I feel like you're a very passionate person around this subject, and I'm just kind of curious, like what led to that.
That's a fantastic question. I think, I mean, it all goes back to early on. I've always found a calling to kind of help and serve other folks. Maybe not so much in my high school jobs, even though I guess those were service industry. But that was, I worked at a few fast food establishments and things like that. But then I wound up going into the Marine Corps. Obviously serving the country, wanting to do that, and I had my family, and my service mindset went towards them. So got out and decided to continue to provide that customer service. I actually wound up being kind of a field representative, going around and going into people's homes and chatting with them and helping them out with their problems on certain technology items, and then became a technician and IT support. And even though we didn't necessarily call it experience management or, customer experience and all of these different things, perhaps, I think it was always there. I think it's difficult to be in a service and support industry without at least some kind of uh, commitment to providing a good experience, at least long term. I've been doing this for a couple decades now. So, um, you kind of have to have the passion to keep it going for that period of time. But as I've just worked my way through the various roles into management and upper management, etc., it's always been how can I provide value to the people that I get the opportunity to serve and work with. You know, at the end of the day, there's two ways that you can look at things in my mind. One is you can look at it like an obligation or a chore or something that you don't really want to do. And maybe sometimes that's the most appropriate, but then or you can look at it as opportunities to really be able to do something for others, to provide a better world, to provide a better experience overall for people and make their day just a little bit better. And in that way, I guess I think of it kind of like the stone that you toss into a lake or whatever, and you get that ripple effect, right? Maybe if I make an impact with one individual, that will help somebody else out down the line. And somewhere in my head, that's always there, kind of leading the charge. I know it sounds a little sappy, but it's the way I think. So
Yeah, no, I mean it's that's awesome. I mean, I resonate with that quite a lot, and I think a lot of people do that. Our actions extend way past the immediacy that we experience them at, and so I definitely resonate with that quite a lot.
and they
Um,
go the other way too, right? Like if I make someone's day awful, there's a good
mm,
chance they're going to pass that along too, and I don't necessarily want to be responsible for that
yeah, yep,
either.
exactly. So we've obviously covered a lot. I think we got a lot of great insight from you and your general thoughts around the subject. But is there anything we haven't touched on that you think is really important, or you just kind of wanted to get out there?
Well, I think one of the big things is when it comes to this, the CX world, and obviously with this amazing nomination and all of that, right? With the CXM stars, it just shows that there's a massive community out there around this. And I would say, don't be afraid to engage with the community, whether that's here joining us on the podcast each week, commenting and sharing that, or whether it's, getting on LinkedIn with professional groups, or even, local organizations. It's a great way to plug in. So whatever fits for you to really get you connected, I think that's very key, because just like we're doing here, when in our normal programming, right? We pick each other's brain, we share different viewpoints, and there's so much power and value in that, because you guys say things sometimes that I would never think of, or probably vice versa, and it just gets your mind kind of churning. And that's the way we improve, is by reflection and really thinking through things rather than just going along with the status quo. So I guess my final suggestion would just be get plugged in somewhere.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that was awesome. You guys, you all heard it here first from Mr. Nelson himself, Mr. Dr. Nelson, the man, the myth, the legend, top 25 CX professional. No, this is great, Josh. I had a lot of fun doing this. This is really awesome to get your insights, and I'm sure everyone listening had a good time listening as well. So thank you all for joining in, and we'll see you next time here on Mastermind for the Masses.
Thanks. Bye.